Yeah, there are many elements. One is the use of the incredibly efficient use of propaganda. And here's a good way to gauge how skillful the Trump has been at this, because Trump did not have a one party state. He didn't have a Goebbels. He's kind of his own Goebbels, and he's very, very skilled at messaging, at images. He's incredible at this. And so, even working in a modern context without the the closed state that Hitler had, Trump was able to convince hundreds of millions of people that he won the 2020 election. He was able to convince people of a very easily empirically verifiable fact that was false,
Yeah.
and even have an insurrection that he incited a violent mob to come on the Capitol. And so those kinds of things, they can happen in a different circumstance, but they can be equally effective. And that's dispiriting. But I mean, the Nazis are famous for having a method where Goebbels said early on, we have to bring the Jewish question to the attention of the public, because there was lots of kind of people didn't like Jews or didn't trust them because maybe they heard anti-Judaism comments in school or in religion. But the Jew was not the state enemy. And that's what the Nazis were able to do. They targeted, one enemy, and they put all of the force of the state toward that. And yet it was never just Jews. In fact, the first people going into Dachau were, leftists, were Jehovah's Witnesses, other kinds of people, and then later became the Jews. So one of the lessons is, we're building this infrastructure of repression for immigrants, but those are not the only people who are being targeted, and there are multiple ways to target people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you talk to people like Jim Comey and Letitia James and John Brennan and all of us who've been sued and pursued, that's one way of doing it as well. So myriad enemies, almost too many, quite frankly. Let's talk about you mentioned one of the things you mentioned was this kind of macho look where Mussolini without his shirt on, and thank God Trump has spared us from that image of himself. However, you also mentioned a semi-deity type attitude, and of course we've got images that come at us all the time of that are Christ-like of Trump. As he says, doctored images, or I was a doctor. What is that? Is that the equivalent?
Yeah, and Trump does this thing with images of Jesus when he feels extremely threatened. When he had his criminal trial, which was a whole spectacle. If you study authoritarian spectacles, you remember how like Matt Gaetz and everybody would show up in New York and they would wear the Trump uniform.
Yep.
Like that was an interesting thing. But during that time, Trump released a sketch. It was supposed to be like a courtroom sketch. And it was him, having to be there testifying or whatever. And Jesus was next to him. So that plays on something that also has not changed since Mussolini. It's called the authoritarian bargain, where they make bargains with elites, religious elites. In this case, we'll talk about, could be business elites, media elites, and they have like an alliance. And so the elites say, okay, they are promised riches and prosperity if they will be loyal in all circumstances to the leader, no matter what he does. So religious elites think of Putin and the Russian Orthodox Church. But Mussolini, who was a total atheist, Frank, I cannot emphasize how much Mussolini hated religion. He even wrote a book when he was young about a cardinal who had a mistress. Like his whole thing was to expose the fraud of religion. And yet he was the person who made the alliance with the Catholic Church and did the Lateran Accords and restored Catholicism into schools. So these are transactional people. But when they have these alliances, it's really good for them, because the more corrupt they become, the more they need the halo of holiness. They need Jesus next to him, or even saying he is Jesus, thanks to AI today. So Mussolini actually, so here we're 100 years ago, we didn't have AI, but he ordered people to refer to him. In Italian, he is Lui, Lui. So when you see fascist documents, the Lui had to be capitalized. So in English, if you wrote about him, it had to be he with a capital H, as though he were a god or God himself.
Yeah.
So these things, that's another example of something that doesn't change.
So with all of these kind of similarities, a couple of and points of comparison, and we could go on and on about, the macho thing. So he may not appear to be macho, but he all of his imagery is macho. And then he selects people like Hegseth, who does 47 push-ups every morning and tells the military, you're all fat. And RFK Jr. is got his shirt off, working out and tan, 24/7. So do you think Trump is smart enough to know all of what you've just recited, or he's got handlers? Where is this coming from?
I'm smiling because this is a very frequent question that I get. It's a very important question. So Trump doesn't read. He's a particular case. Mussolini and Hitler like to read a lot, and other people today. But I do believe Ivana, his first wife, now deceased in suspicious circumstances, that when they were married, he had in his bedroom 2 books. This is Trump.
Yeah.
He had Art of the Deal, and he had a book of Hitler's speeches. So he knows, he has ideas about the leaders he likes. Remember, he told General Kelly in the first administration that he wanted his generals to be acting like Hitler's generals.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes he's wrong, but he has a sense of, and he also looks very carefully.
Hitler's generals try to kill him.
Yes, they did.
Okay, I'm just saying.
Kelly, well, Kelly had to tell him that, like in 1944 and other times, there were assassination attempts. I have that in my Strongman book and in the resistance chapter.
Yeah.
So he has a sense of what kind of model of leadership he likes, and that's why he's always talking about Putin and Xi, and he looks to those people and he watches what they're doing. He'll talk about like the justice system of the Chinese, where, he can say he wants to execute someone and then it can be done in like 5 hours. You don't have to wait around, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But really what I concluded is that, unfortunately, I learned to my dismay, and I wrote this during the first administration, that Trump had a very similar character to a lot of these other people. And I'm talking like Idi Amin, Gaddafi, that they're completely amoral, they're completely transactional, they truly see people as pawns and assets to be used. They know how, they have an instinct about people's weaknesses so that they can, control them either through compromat or other things. So they're very skilled in an instinctual level. And then the last thing I'd say is, because they have no morals, they will do things, if they see a juncture for action, they will do things that other people wouldn't do because they're lawless.